Software engineer Dov Bulka felt like a heart attack just waiting to happen.
All of a sudden, my cholesterol shot up to 270. My triglycerides were high off the chart, above 200 or 250.
He was also pre-diabetic, so he did what many people do. He followed the government nutrition guidelines for getting healthy.
And I clamped down very, very hard on fats. As far as carbohydrates are concerned, I ate unlimited carbohydrates because nobody said carbohydrates were bad for you.
He loaded up on whole grain cereals, fresh fruits, and vegetables. Still, he gained 40 pounds. He started taking the statin Lipitor to lower his cholesterol, but it remained high. Then he accompanied his wife to a diet meeting in Durham, and the physician, Dr. Eric Westman, was saying incredible things.
Hello.
He said, don't eat so many carbohydrates, eat fat, saturated fat.
I was shocked. There's no way I would ever be able to give up carbohydrates.
But his wife had already lost 50 pounds in 6 months on the diet. And then Dr. Westman dropped the bombshell. Fat isn't the enemy. It's sugar. So Bulka cut way back on the amount of sugar and simple carbohydrates he was eating. He immediately lost weight, and his glucose numbers plummeted.
My blood sugar numbers went down for the first time in 10 years. And that was a shocker to me. This is working.
That convinced him to start eating Westman's high-fat, low-carb diet. He lost the 40 pounds, and even though he cut his statin dose in half, his good cholesterol doubled, and his bad cholesterol and triglycerides went down. No longer pre-diabetic, Bulka was ecstatic. To him, this was a nutrition revolution.
It is opposite to everything we were told in the last 40 years.
The way to raise your good cholesterol in the blood is by eating fat. In fact, it's saturated fat, the very fat you've been taught not to eat, is the best way to raise your good cholesterol.
The US government told us to eat a certain way. It was all wrong. How can this be?
How can that be? How did saturated fat become such a nutrition villain in the first place? It began after World War II with scientist Ancel Keys. He wasn't a heart doctor, but a starvation expert. He noticed after the war many American businessmen, some of the best fed people on the planet, were dying of heart attacks in increasing numbers. He thought it was fat in the diet. He thought eating a lot of fat caused high cholesterol, which he thought caused heart disease. So he launched a worldwide study measuring how much fat men ate and how many got heart disease. It became known as the 7-country study, which showed a very clear trend between eating fatty foods and getting heart disease. Key's study was one of the reasons that the American Heart Association eventually recommended this low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet for virtually everyone. But there's a problem. You see, Key's study was not just of 7 countries, but 22 in all. It's just that Keyes picked the 7 that fit his hypothesis. If you pick 7 different ones, you can make the graph show no correlation whatsoever. But the damage was done. Fat, saturated fat, was now bad for you. Food companies produced man-made fats like Crisco and margarine to replace it. In the 70s, for the first time, nutritional guidelines for all Americans were issued. The American Medical Association was outraged, saying one-size-fits-all guidelines are a bad idea. And they weren't even compiled by a health agency, but by a legislative committee led by Senator George McGovern. They called for people to eat less fat and more carbohydrates. Eventually, those guidelines became the food pyramid, which shoved fat into a very tiny space at the top and helped cement our fat phobia. The food plate, released in 2011, doesn't even include fat. Westman says with such little real science, fat got a bad rap.
Well, if saturated fat were put on trial for causing heart disease today, it would be found not guilty.
Westman's high-fat diet landed him on the January 2014 cover of Woman's World magazine. His decades of research show a low-carb, high-fat diet helps patients lose weight, raise their good cholesterol, and lower their bad cholesterol and triglycerides. And the fat phobia, that eating it would give you heart disease, he says, just isn't true.
The fear about eating fat has been dispelled. And so that's at the crux of the fear of eating a low-carb diet is, well, what will we eat? It's fat, and well, we can't eat fat when, yes, you can.
In fact, a study of nearly 348,000 people followed for decades showed how much saturated fat they ate had no impact on whether or not they developed heart disease. Westman does add no diet is perfect. Nutritional needs are different for every person, and you need one that's right for you. But he believes instead of fearing fat, we ought to fear sugar and starch.
So if you have too much sugar and starch, you can gain weight, gain fat weight. You can also gain blood fats.
So it's sugar, not fat, that turns into body fat. And for years, studies have shown added sugar raises your cholesterol. And now, for the first time, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says eating too much sugar by itself can double your risk of dying from heart disease. So, has sugar, not fat, been the real dietary evil all along?
All of a sudden it hit me. I have just stumbled upon a scientific breakthrough.